So welcome again to Bloomerang Academy. Thank you so much for joining us today, where we are talking about how you can use Bloomerang and Zapier to automate your recurring donor communications with Mailchimp. And I would like to introduce our presenter for today, Jessie Gilchrist. Jessie is a Zapier certified expert and Bloomerang integrations consultant at Sidekick Solutions. Sidekick Solutions is a Bloomerang partner specializing in system automations like Mailchimp.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today. Well, it's great to meet everyone today. I am so excited to be here. As Diana mentioned, the goal of today's webinar is to show you how you can use Bloomerang and Zapier to automate your workflows with Mailchimp. This can be an integral part of your fundraising efforts, especially as it pertains to recurring donors. So today we're going to cover a few things. I'm going to touch on real quick some of the benefits of the native Mailchimp integration. Then we're going to introduce how Bloomerang and Zapier work together, why Zapier integrations are a key feature of your Bloomerang system and fundraising strategy, and then explore and demonstrate how you can use the Bloomerang Zapier app with Mailchimp to not only trigger a recurring donor stewardship series, but also automate email acknowledgements for your recurring donors. So don't worry, we have demos throughout this webinar to show you how to set up these automations at your organization. This isn't just theoretical, we're actually going to show you how to build these automations yourself. And as Diana mentioned, feel free to submit any questions during the presentation in the chat or in the Q&A. We have a couple of breaks built in and then one at the end for more questions as well. So let's go ahead and dive on in. So the first thing we want to do is a quick poll to see how many of you are using Zapier currently, and if you're using Zapier, are you using it with Bloomerang?
Thanks, Jessie, and thanks, everyone. It looks like about 47% of our participants today, this is their first time to hear of Zapier. 38% have heard of Zapier before but have not used it. And we have 9% who are using Zapier but not with Bloomerang, and 6% who are using Zapier with Bloomerang.
Perfect. That is really great, because the first thing that we're going to do is talk about what Zapier is and why you potentially would want to use Zapier for integrating Bloomerang with Mailchimp instead of the native integration. Okay. So since we have a few of you that are new to Zapier, we want to start with a high-level overview of Zapier and why we believe this is a key feature of your Bloomerang system and fundraising strategy. So you might be wondering why we're talking about Zapier when this presentation is all around how we integrate Bloomerang and Mailchimp. And it's a fair question that offers an exciting answer. Now, many of you are likely already aware of the native integration that Bloomerang has with Mailchimp. And that integration is fantastic. It allows you to create templates of constituents based off of giving or other timeline activity, or even constituent attributes, and sync those templates to Mailchimp to create a targeted communication. That native tool works great, and we highly encourage you to lean into that native integration as much as you can, because the functionality is fantastic. But there are other opportunities for integrating Bloomerang and Mailchimp that extend beyond the native integration. And more than anything, this is really kind of creating a real-time sync and being able to automate your communications back out of Mailchimp. So Zapier-enabled integrations between Bloomerang and Mailchimp can supplement the Bloomerang native Mailchimp integration and provide additional functionality for marketing automation, workflow and drip campaigns, and automating list building. So taking some of that manual work out so that you have more time to focus on other cultivation and stewardship activities related to your fundraising efforts. So let's talk a little bit about Zapier. Zapier is the software that enables additional Bloomerang integration and fundraising opportunities. It's the middleware that sits between your Bloomerang database and other apps like Mailchimp, helping them to talk to each other. I like to think of it as a bridge, or sometimes I even explain it as Google Translate. It takes the data from one of your systems and allows you to translate it and send it to another system. And at its core, Zapier is automation software. With Zapier, you can build one integration or many, automating hundreds of tasks around your Bloomerang system within a single platform. So let's talk about why we get excited about the potential between Bloomerang and Zapier. There's three main reasons. First and most important, Zapier connects to 2,000 other applications. Any app in Zapier's directory can be connected with Bloomerang. So if it's on Zapier's list, it can be integrated, and this includes Mailchimp. So if you happen to go to zapier.com/apps, you can get Zapier's full directory, and it looks like they're actually saying now that they have over 3,000 apps in their directory. So the list keeps growing. You can search for a specific app that you're using. So for example, Bloomerang. Or you can also search their app categories to find other software options that your organization could use and sync with your Bloomerang database. So for example, if we go down here, there's some great options. Oh, went ahead and clicked ahead. If we go to forms and surveys, online forms are often an option or a question that we get. You can see top form apps and survey apps that could be used and integrated with your Bloomerang database. So any other tools the organization is using, go ahead and go to zapier.com/apps and you can see what other or what integration opportunities there are between those systems. The second reason we get excited about Zapier is because Zapier was designed for anyone to build integrations. You don't need a developer or lines and lines of code to be able to build a Zap. Anyone can build and maintain workflows in Zapier, and we're going to walk through some builds today so you can get a feel for what this process looks like and how we use this with data from Bloomerang. The last reason we get excited is that Zapier enables custom integrations. You aren't limited to a one-size-fits-all workflow, mapping, or formatting. You truly can build an integration that is perfect for your organization and your workflow. So let's go ahead and dive into how Zapier can be used to automate workflows for recurring donors between Bloomerang and Mailchimp. So Mailchimp's ability to support fundraising efforts goes far beyond simple list segmentation. Instead of merely segmenting subscribers, Mailchimp automation allows us to take advantage of a functionality called customer journeys. And customer journeys allow us to develop automated workflows based on subscriber activity. So we could set up a customer journey in Mailchimp to trigger when a subscriber is tagged, when a subscriber joins a new group in your audience, when a date-based merge field meets certain criteria, or when a custom event is added to the subscriber record. Now we're going to focus on this last example here, this custom event example, because this is what's really going to allow you to automate communications for recurring donors. So let's go ahead and dive into our first use case. Events in Mailchimp, as I mentioned, are similar to timeline activity in Bloomerang, and they're used to log activities, events, or even engagements that a subscriber has with your organization. So different events on a subscriber's record in Mailchimp could trigger different automated emails or even an email series. So our first use case that we're going to focus on is going to show you how we can create a custom event on a subscriber in Mailchimp. So that's right here is our final goal, is to create that custom event. In this custom event, we're also going to trigger an email series designed to steward recurring donors. So let's go ahead and dive right into the demo. So in our demo build we're going to do today, we're not only going to show you how to build this Zap or this workflow in Zapier, but also how you can use the customer journey functionality in Mailchimp to set up an automation for a multi-email stewardship series. So let's hop into Zapier and set up our Zap. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my Zaps page and I'm going to click Make a Zap. So a Zap in Zapier is a workflow. And every workflow begins with a trigger, which is an event in our first database or our source database that we want to trigger or perform additional actions based on. So the trigger is what prompts the integration to run. And we are actually going to use the Bloomerang app, and I'm going to name this first. We're going to say Bloomerang Recurring Donation Schedules to create an event in Mailchimp. Okay, so we're going to start with a trigger, and we're going to use the Bloomerang Zapier app. And our trigger event is going to be a new transaction. Now I'm going to select my Bloomerang account here. And then we get options to set up our trigger. Now for this workflow, if I didn't change anything here, it would trigger for every type of transaction in Bloomerang, whether that be a donation, a recurring donation schedule, a pledge payment, any of those options. But for this use case, we only want to trigger when a new recurring donation schedule is created. So we're going to set our type to recurring donation schedule. Now we don't need to pull in any cumulative giving history or household information, so we can leave these blank. And we're going to go ahead and click continue. So the next thing we need to do is we need to test our trigger to generate sample data. And the reason why we need to test our trigger and pull in sample data is so that we can identify the data that comes through on a recurring donation schedule and map it to the appropriate places in Mailchimp. So I'm going to go ahead and click test trigger, and Zapier is going to go and pull a recent recurring donation schedule that I can use to set up my mapping. You can see it went ahead and it pulled one in right here, and we have all of this data that we could use to map to our subscriber in Mailchimp and to create that custom event. Now this transaction right here is a sample transaction only and will not run through the integration because it was created before the integration was turned on. Any automation you create in Zapier, once you turn it on, there's a little toggle up here to turn on or off. Once it's set up and you turn it on, it's on a go forward basis. So any historical data is not going to sync through your workflow. Now, once we have our sample data, the first step we want to do, or our first action that we want our automation to perform, is that we actually want to add a filter, because we only want to sync the constituent to Mailchimp as a subscriber if they have a valid email, they have not opted out and the email one, not only they have an email on their account, but the email is not flagged bad. So we are actually going to add 3 pieces to our filter here. The first one that we're going to add is that we're going to say that the primary email, so the primary email on the constituent's account, we're going to select a logic operator to say that it exists. So on the left, we're identifying our Bloomerang field. In the middle, we're saying what logic we want to apply to it. And then potentially we will have data over here on the right-hand side. So now I'm going to go ahead and click and, because we want to actually add 3 different criteria to our filter. So not only does the email need to exist, we also want that the primary email, constituent primary email is bad. We want this to be set to as false. So that means that it is not bad. And then our last piece of criteria is that we want the email interest type, interest type does not match, and we're going to put opted out. So if they've opted out of emails from our organization, we don't want to sync them to Mailchimp. So again, we're saying that the email exists, the email is not bad, and that they are not opted out of emails. Now you can see right here that there's no space here between opted out. So this is actually the way that it appears when it comes through the Bloomerang Zapier app. So it's not with a space, it's actually without a space. So that's something to note if you're setting these up on your own. If you want to exclude constituents who have opted out of your emails, opted out needs to be one word without a space. So now that we've set up our filter, I can go ahead and test this, and it's going to show me that our Zap would have continued because the email existed, it was not bad, and the constituent was not opted out. So after we've set up our filter, we'll want to add our next action step. So before we can create an event in Mailchimp, we need to make sure the subscriber exists. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to search for Mailchimp, and we're actually going to add or update our subscriber. So we have to make sure that subscriber exists in Mailchimp before we try and create an event on that subscriber record. So we're using the add update subscriber action. I'm going to select my Mailchimp account. And then it's going to allow us to set up our action. So we'll select the audience that the subscriber should be added or updated within. We're going to map our constituent's primary email to the subscriber email. So these fields here in Zapier operate really similarly to a mail merge, where you click into the field and it allows you to pick any data or any field from a prior action. So in this instance, we are actually going to be pulling from our new transaction trigger in Bloomerang, and we can just type in primary email, and you can see it pulls in all the fields from Bloomerang or all the data from Bloomerang that matches this search criteria I entered. So I'm just going to go ahead and click constituent primary email value, and it maps that right in there. Now we also want to confirm that update existing is set to yes, because if the email already exists in our Mailchimp database, we want to make sure it's updated with any changes in information that we're going to map in this action below. So update is yes. And then we're going to come down to what are called merge fields in Mailchimp. So we have a number of custom merge fields set up here, as this is tied to our Sidekick Solutions sandbox. But merge fields in Mailchimp serve kind of dual purposes. On one end, merge fields can be used to merge into an email template to dynamically populate that email based off of the subscriber's information. So for example, name and last name, first name and last name. Being able to dynamically map those into your email is a great benefit to personalize your communications. On the other end of the spectrum, merge fields in Mailchimp can also be used similarly to custom fields in Bloomerang. So you can have merge fields that capture different constituent information and can be used to then segment your constituents in Mailchimp for more targeted solicitations. So we're going to go ahead and we are just going to map some information in here. And we're actually, instead of the first name, we're actually going to use the informal name. And the reason why is because if we have a subscriber that's for an organization constituent in Bloomerang, we want to pull the informal name, as there is typically not always data in the first name or last name fields for a primary contact. So we're going to do first name for the informal name, and then we'd pull our last name in here. So again, I'm just pulling this data from our new transaction in Bloomerang trigger. We can come down here, we could map address information if we wanted to, a phone number, a birthday. Now here is where we get to a couple of the custom merge fields that we have set up in our Sidekick Solutions sandbox, and I recommend that you set up as well. There are two primary ones. The first one is your Bloomerang account number, and the second one is the Bloomerang constituent ID. Now, the Bloomerang account number is the account number that you would see on an account in Bloomerang. So if I were to open this constituent, you would see that his account number is 717. And so if I map the account number in here, you can see there's our constituent account number of 717. Now, this is really helpful if you ever want to pull an export from Mailchimp and import any email activity back into Bloomerang. The account number serves as kind of that perfect match to that existing account in Bloomerang. Now, this other field, the constituent ID, I'm going to include this in here. And you can see we have a constituent ID field right here. And the reason why we want to map the constituent ID is because this is it's almost like a hidden unique ID number for each account, but it's what's used on the back end for automations, whether you're using the Bloomerang Zapier app, or if you're doing a custom integration using the Bloomerang API. This constituent ID is as unique as the account number, but is what is used kind of on the back end for any type of automation or connection between applications. So this constituent ID is helpful if we ever wanted to sync data from Mailchimp back to Bloomerang. So for example, if we wanted to sync new subscribers or unsubscribes in Mailchimp back to Bloomerang, this constituent ID would make that process a lot easier because we wouldn't have to first find a constituent in Bloomerang. We would already have that ID to match to. So you can see we have a number of other custom merge fields here that we have set up in our sandbox. We're not going to map to those for this use case, but you can create as many merge fields as you want in your Mailchimp database. So I'm going to go ahead and click continue. So now we have our trigger of our new transaction. We're only going to continue if the email is valid and it's not bad and they are not opted out. And then we're going to add or update our subscriber in Mailchimp. So the next piece that we want to do is I'm actually going to come back up here to my transaction and I'm going to show you a couple of pieces of data that we need to reformat. So you can see that if we look at the amount for the donation, it comes through, or for the recurring donation schedule, it comes through as 10. It's not formatted as a currency value. Now we want this formatted as currency, and I'm going to show you why once we get a little bit later here in this demo. But we want a formatter to convert this amount to a currency where we have the dollar symbol and 2 decimal places. We also want the start date to be formatted in kind of what I'd call like a pretty version. So the start date comes through as year, month, day, and it has a timestamp. So we actually want to also reformat this start date to be kind of what I call like a pretty or a constituent facing date. So we can do that using an app in Zapier called Formatter. So Zapier comes pre-built with a number of apps. Filter was one that we used earlier right here, and Formatter is another. The Formatter app in Zapier allows us to reformat data from our source application into a format that we want to use when we write to our target application. So we're going to start first. We're going to do the formatter to convert the date. So we're going to do a date time conversion. And we're going to convert that to month to year. So we're going to choose to transform our date. We don't need to add a subtract time. We're just going to format it. And you can see right here that I'm going to first do my inputs. This is where we're going to pull in the start date from our trigger. And then in the to format, I can select the format that I want to change this to. So I'm going to change this to month, day, year with forward slashes. I'm going to click continue so that we can test this step. Oh, it's going to make me 1 second here. Okay. So if we come down here and we test this, you're going to see that it's going to convert this to the appropriate month, day, year in a more constituent facing manner so that we can use that when we automate our communication in Mailchimp. Now, the next one we're going to do is we are actually going to format our donation amount as currency. So we're going to go to Formatter again right here. And this time we're going to choose numbers as our action event. And for transform, we're going to choose number currency. So you can see right here, there's format currency. So similar to how we did for the date, for this one, we're going to pull in now the amount. So we can map in our amount as our input. Our currency is going to be US dollars, and then we can choose our currency format. So right now, this is already has the selection we want where we are going to have our dollar symbol and then 2 decimal places after. So I click continue, and I'm going to test this. So it shows me my output. You can see that it's reformatted that $10 recurring donation on that schedule to be formatted as currency. So now that we have the data in the format that we want, we can finally add our step to create our custom event in Mailchimp. So I'm going to choose Mailchimp. And this time we're going to choose an action, and we are going to create a custom event. Choose my Mailchimp account. Choose my audience. And enter again. We're going to do the email address again. So the primary email. And then this is where we get to customize the event that's created in Mailchimp. So we get to create a custom event name. And when we create our custom event name, we want to go ahead and do it in lowercase. So we're going to call it recurring donation schedule. And we want to put underscores where there would be spaces. It just works better with any type of custom piece that we're creating and with Mailchimp. So if you're going to do anything that would have a space in there, just use an underscore. Now we also get to set up our properties. So this is data that we want to live on the event that we're creating in Mailchimp. So we can go ahead here, and I'm going to create a couple of these. We're going to do our start date. Start date, we're going to do frequency, our amount, our fund, one more here, campaign, and our appeal. Okay. So now that we've identified the properties we want to track, we can go ahead and map the data from our new transaction trigger. So I can come in and pull in the appeal. I can pull in the campaign. I can pull in the fund. We're going to pull in our amount from our conversion here. So we're not going to pull the amount from the new transaction Bloomerang trigger. We're going to pull our pretty version here. We're going to pull in our frequency. And then the start date, again, we're not going to pull from the new transaction trigger. We're going to choose the pretty version that we reformatted. So you can see that for this recurring donation schedule, this is the data that would write to our properties. So now let's go ahead and show what this would look like. So I'm going to go into Bloomerang here, and I am going to set up a new recurring donation schedule for Roger William. So I'm going to go to his timeline. We're going to create a new recurring donation. We're going to make this one $5 to our unrestricted fund and our annual campaign. Now, again, we're using old campaign values. This is all just in a sandbox here, but you would select the ones that are appropriate for your recurring donation. Online donation. My start date, we're going to put this as, let's say, the 25th. We're going to make this a weekly. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save this. And you'll see that once I save this, it's going to go ahead and create a custom event on Roger's record here in Mailchimp. So if I go to Mailchimp, let me actually zoom in a little bit here. There we go. If I go to my Mailchimp audience and my contact list, you'll see here's, let's see, I think it's still syncing here. Let's give it just a second. Still working on syncing over. I can show you one that came through the test, but sometimes it takes just a second for the data to sync over from Bloomerang. Double check something on my end over here. Yeah, so it's still working on syncing over. It's performing those conversions here. So if you see right now, Zapier is working to perform all of these steps. So after we created that new recurring donation schedule, it was passing it through the filter, adding or updating the subscriber in Mailchimp, performing our formatter steps, and then creating that custom event. So that should be in there now. Looks like it might have gotten hung up in Zapier. Yep, so it actually got hung up in Zapier, but I have another example right here to show you. So this is one I tested last night. So you can see right here on this version of Roger William, if we scroll down on his activity feed, you'll see his recurring donation schedule. And it has an amount, the frequency, the fund. This one I hadn't set up a campaign and appeal, so it didn't populate those properties. And then the start date. So now that I've shown you kind of how we would set up this custom event for recurring donation schedule, let's talk about how you would set up the automation in Mailchimp as a customer journey to send an email series triggered based off of this new recurring donation custom event getting created. So I'm going to go to the automations page in Mailchimp and click My Journeys. Now for my journeys, you can see I don't have anything here set up. So we're actually going to go to create, and we're going to create a new customer journey. Now we're going to name this. We're going to call this new recurring donation schedule stewardship series. Okay. And I'm going to click Start Building. So the first thing we need to do when we're building a customer journey in Mailchimp is we need to choose our starting point. This is like a trigger in Zapier. So it's what event or activity in Mailchimp do we want to trigger this automation and pull a subscriber into it? So we're going to choose our starting point, and we're actually going to come down to API integrations and choose Event API. So this is how we can trigger off of that new custom event being created on the activity feed for Roger William. We're going to choose our event name. So this is going to be our recurring donation schedule, and click Save Our Starting Point. Now, once we set up our starting point, and please ignore this little pop-up on the side, this is our sandbox, so it's a free account, and it just really likes to remind me that we need to, would need to upgrade in order to turn on an automation. So the customer journey in Mailchimp works really similarly to how Zaps over here are set up in Zapier. So we have our starting point, which is our trigger, and then we can add subsequent steps. So for example, let's say that this stewardship series, we want to send a 3-email series with the first email sent one day after the recurring donation schedule is set up, and each subsequent email 1 week after that. So once this custom event is created in Mailchimp, the first thing we want to do is we want to add a delay. So we can click the little plus sign and click to add a delay. You can see that it defaults for 1 week. So we can click the 3 little dots, edit this journey point, and change it to 1 day. So after the recurring donation is set up, it's going to wait 1 day. And then we want to do is we're going to then send an email. Now, then we talked about after that, we want to wait a week. So we'd add another delay. This one would be for a week. We're going to add our second email. Scroll down. Then we'd add our second week-long delay, and then we would add our third email. So you can see that you can create this automation or this flow for an email series that's triggered off of a single event being created in your Mailchimp database. So once we've set up our actions and confirmed our delays are the right periods, the next thing you'd want to do is edit your emails. So again, we click the 3 little dots and click Edit Journey Point. Now, when you are editing the emails that you're sending out, first is you can rename them, and this is more internal, so we could call this, stewardship email 1, email 1. You can edit how the to and from fields look like. So the to field is the constituent's email address. Maybe the from name, I want to change this to be my company's name instead of my own personal or my username. And maybe I want to change this to be a generic email instead of the email that's tied to my user account in Mailchimp. So I can go ahead and save the to and from settings. I can edit the subject. So maybe the first one is like a thank you for setting up recurring giving, or however you want that to be worded for your organization. You can edit the subject. And then this schedule piece is really powerful as well. So right now it's going to default to saying that it's going to send the email as soon as that delay ends. It's going to go ahead and send that email. Now what you might want to do is instead of as soon as possible, you can change it to say only send the emails between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. So that if a constituent happened to set up their recurring donation schedule at 1 a.m. while they were browsing online, you can go ahead and make sure that the subsequent emails you send them are only during normal, business hours, or normal times you would like to be emailing a constituent. If you use as soon as possible, it's going to send as soon as that delay ended, which is based off of the time that they entered that recurring donation schedule. So only send between is a great option to make sure that you are only sending emails to constituents during, normal or preferred hours. So once we've set up these settings, then we can go ahead and create our email template. So you can use a previous email campaign in Mailchimp to serve as a template or a starting point, or you can select a template and build it from scratch. So it's going to go ahead. It's going to let me select a template, any of Mailchimp's templates. I'm just going to choose a basic, simple text here. When I select my template, then we obviously get to edit our email. Now, I'm not going to build out a full 3 email series here, but there is one piece I want to show you, and this is how you would pull the properties we set up. So these properties that we set up on our create custom event. Go back here, show you those. So these properties for the start date, the amount, frequency, fund campaign appeal. The properties for this, we can pull into our email template as a merge field. So the property automatically can be used as a merge field. So what we want to do is, let's say we're editing our content here. So we're going to edit our text block. So we've got our text that we're putting in here. And let's say at this point we want to enter our merge field or our property from our custom event. So this is something, and again, Diane, I believe, does plan to set up not only the recording, but potentially the slide deck as well. And so this is in there. There is very specific formatting in Mailchimp for how you identify which contact property or which event property you want to pull into your communication. So the way that you do this is you do an asterisk, a pipe, event in all caps, and a colon. And then you would enter the property name. So maybe it's the start date, and it ends with a pipe and an asterisk as well. And again, these probably look very tiny, so let me zoom in here. Event and start date. Perhaps you want to pull in the amount, so it'd be event, amount. Now, any place in if your property name has a space, so for example, start date has a space, we need to replace that with an underscore. But you can see that the standard formatting is going to be essentially asterisk, pipe, event, colon, property name, a pipe, and then an asterisk. So I'm going to actually pull this up here because it's a little bit cleaner to see it. There we go. So you can see the property name just gets plugged into this format, and this allows the automation to pull in that property from the event that triggered the automation in Mailchimp. So once you've finalized all your email content for your 3 email series, or however many emails you want to include in your stewardship series, you can go ahead and turn that customer journey on in Mailchimp and begin sending that email series to donors when a new recurring donation schedule is set up in Bloomerang. So before we move on to our next use case, which is a little similar to this, but with some changes to it, I want to take a quick break for questions before we kind of dive into the next use case.
Thanks, Jessie. We have a couple of great questions here.
Yeah.
Some general questions about Zapier too. Chris asks, what happens if one of the apps we are using updates their product and changes the way it communicates with Zapier? Could that break the workflow chain? And what happens in that case?
Yeah, Chris, that's a great question. I would say most apps are really great about when they make changes to their Zapier app. One, they migrate usually all existing users to the new version of the app. And 2, it's kind of best practice. And I've yet to come across an organization or an app that when they change the way their Zapier app is designed, it causes an integration to break. Most of the time it's enhancing functionality and adding additional functionality or just routine maintenance. But I've yet to come across a change to a Zapier app by an application that causes that workflow to break. So I'd say I haven't encountered it yet. And we've been in the Zapier integration space for, I think, close to 5 years, maybe over 5 years now. And most are, and I think a big part of that is that the developers that are creating these Zapier apps know how to make updates in a way that isn't changing any additional use of that app. So I know Bloomerang does this really well when they roll out releases or, resolve bugs that potentially come up. They are great. It should not break your app or your workflow, should not break your connection to Zapier or impact your workflow when changes are made to the Zapier app. So highly unlikely that happens. I have yet to see it, but if it does, there typically is support on either end from either your source app or your target app that caused that issue that would be able to help you resolve it.
Thanks, Jessie. Catherine asks, can you have or use branching logic, like if then else within Zapier?
Yeah, so within Zapier, if you upgrade to what's called the professional plan in Zapier, it does allow you to utilize a feature that's called paths. So paths in Zapier, you go to their app list here. So paths in Zapier operate similar to branching logic. And it's a really great feature because it allows you to run up to 3 paths in a single workflow. So you can have data processed down either one or multiple of those paths based off of the logic that is set up on that. And the logic operates identically to the filters that we set up in this use case. So paths are a great feature, but it does require you to upgrade to what is called the professional plan in order to access that feature. And I believe similarly in Mailchimp, in your customer journeys, you can have if then logic as well, but does require a certain level of subscription to have that in there as well.
Great, thanks, Jessie.
So stewarding recurring donors is only part of the equation. We can also use a similar workflow between Bloomerang and Mailchimp to automate acknowledgements to recurring donors for each installment or payment they make toward that recurring donation schedule. This can save a significant amount of time for your organization if recurring donations are a large part of your fundraising stream. So in this use case, we will create a custom event on a subscriber in Mailchimp for each new recurring donation payment. And that event will trigger a single email acknowledgement to the donor. So let's go ahead and hop into Zapier. So I'm going to actually show you the workflow, or the steps of the workflow are actually identical. Let me go out and then come back into this so it collapses a little bit. But the steps in the Zap are identical to what we just built for a recurring donation schedule. The only difference is some slight changes to the mapping. So our steps are going to be exactly the same. It's loading here. Might have frozen on me. Let's refresh. So the steps should be the same. We'll go back over here while that's catching up. Is that we're going to trigger on a new recurring donation. If the constituent's okay to email, we're going to add or update the subscriber, format the date, format the amount, and create a custom event in Mailchimp. So you can see right here, there are our steps again. So in this one, we're going to do this a little bit differently. So this would be a recurring donation payment. So our trigger, the only difference in our trigger is that instead of triggering on a recurring donation schedule, we're going to trigger on recurring donation payment. So we're going to come in, we're going to choose recurring donation payment. So we want to trigger on the installment itself. We're going to continue. And we're going to test our trigger here. So I'm actually going to retest this so that it pulls in a payment instead of the recurring donation schedule we were previously using. There we go. Now our filter is going to remain the same. We only want to continue if the email exists, the email is not bad, and the constituent is not opted out. Our add update subscriber can remain exactly the same as well. So the same merge fields that we're mapping data to, same audience, mapping in our subscriber primary email. Again, mapping informal name to the first name, last name. And then down here, we have our Bloomerang account number and Bloomerang constituent ID. Now, when we get to our formatter steps for the date and time and the amount, the only difference here, the format conversion we're doing is actually the same, but the difference is the field that we are pulling in to reformat. So for this one, we're actually going to pull in the date of the transaction. But again, you can see it comes through in not the prettiest format or the format that we would want to use when merging into a donation acknowledgement. So we're going to go ahead and again convert it to month, day, year. So I'm going to click continue and refresh this so that it spits out our output again. Okay. And then for the amount, it actually is already set up the way we need to. So we don't need to change the amount or the field that's mapping into convert the amount to currency because it's the same field that we use for the recurring donation schedule. So we can just click close. Now, other than the trigger, the new transaction triggering off of a recurring donation payment versus a recurring donation schedule, the only material or primary change is going to be to how we have our custom event set up in Mailchimp. So instead of calling this custom event recurring donation schedule, we're going to call this recurring donation payment. And we don't need a start date. We're actually going to call this just the date. We don't need our frequency. We can keep fund campaign appeal, and then we have our amount. We potentially could even go more simplistic in this if we wanted to, and we could get rid of the fund campaign and appeal properties if we didn't need this information in our custom event to then pull into our acknowledgement. So if we truly just wanted date and amount, we could go as simple as this with our properties on the custom event. Now I have in here, let me exit this. On that same constituent, I was showing you the record for the recurring donation schedule. Zoom back out here. If I go back to my audience, my contacts. Okay. I can show you what the custom event looks like for on the activity feed. Here's the recurring donation schedule that we showed in that last use case. And here is the one for the recurring donation payment. So you can see there's similar data, but what you would probably have was you would have a single recurring donation schedule set up. And then a few months down the line, you'd see each installment of the recurring donation or each payment above that. And each recurring donation payment can trigger this automation we're about to walk through, which would be for the recurring donation acknowledgement. So similar to what we did for the recurring donation schedules, I'm going to go to the automations page and I'm going to create a new customer journey. This is going to be our recurring donation acknowledgement. Our starting point, we're going to use again API integrations in the event API, but instead of recurring donation schedule, we're going to choose recurring donation payment. Now in this use case, we only want a single email to go out. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add our delay. We're going to say a delay of 1 day. Or actually, let's say 1 hour on this one. So we want to send it 1 hour after the recurring donation is processed. And then we are just going to send a single email. So we then again could come in, similar as we did for the recurring donation schedules, edit our to and from, our subject, our schedule, and then design our email for that acknowledgement. And same as we did for the recurring donation schedule, we would set up our property name as our merge field so that we could pull the date and the amount of that recurring donation installment. We can pull that into the Mailchimp email that would go out to personalize and ensure that that acknowledgement that the constituent is receiving matches the amount and the date of their actual installment. So you may be curious about what other scenarios might work for your organization in terms of triggering automated emails or email series based on custom events in Mailchimp. So this is just a short list of examples, and you may be able to think of other instances where your organization would want to automate emails. But common examples are a new donor welcome series, if a constituent donated to a specific campaign, if the constituent is assigned a primary solicitor, if the constituent registers for or attends a class event or program, or if a constituent volunteered with your organization. So these are really just the tip of the iceberg, and we encourage you to think about different types of custom events that could be specific to your organization, where an automated email or email series would not only strengthen your fundraising efforts, but also save you time. So to wrap up today, I want to leave you with a few thoughts on the power of Bloomerang integrations using Zapier, and specifically with Mailchimp. So at Sidekick Solutions, we believe that Bloomerang is your central system for donor and fundraising activity. So whether you pursue the native integration with Mailchimp or want to do a more advanced use case or automation using Zapier, we highly encourage you to start from the lens that Bloomerang is the core of your donor management and fundraising technology. Integrations and automations that you set up should supplement your Bloomerang database. They don't replace it. So automating these stewardship communications and acknowledgements are an easy way to free up time, allowing you to focus on other cultivation and mission-driven efforts. So the next step would truly be getting started. You can sign up for a Zapier account to automate your Mailchimp integration. There is a free trial and free up to certain limits. The use cases we identified today would require a starter plan at a minimum, which is the lowest paid plan on Zapier. The free plan in Zapier only allows for single step workflows. So the fact that we had multiple steps in our workflows would require you to have, at a minimum, the lowest paid plan that Zapier offers. Now, nonprofits do get a discount. So if you are new and are just getting started with Zapier, I highly encourage you to reach out to Zapier and apply for their nonprofit discount. Next, connect your Bloomerang and Mailchimp accounts to Zapier and set up some simple Zaps to build your comfort and confidence in your workflow. Design your customer journey in Mailchimp for a single automated email or an email series, and then turn your Zap on and monitor it. Watch as tasks queue in Zapier and resolve errors. High five for successes. And a great piece of this is also to test. So if you set up a sync between Bloomerang and Mailchimp, do some tests. And then also with a customer journey in Mailchimp, you likely would want to create or trigger your workflow so that it creates that custom event. And then you can confirm and make sure that the email and emails are coming through in the manner and in the time frame in which you design them to. Now, I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy day today to attend this webinar. I think this is a fantastic use case. My name is Jessie. My email is here, and our door at Sidekick Solutions is truly always open. If you'd like to work with a consultant to set up Zaps or develop a custom Bloomerang integration to address a unique use case, please don't hesitate to reach out. This could be a use case specific to Mailchimp, or it could be for another application that your organization is using. I'm going to hand it off to Diana for a quick poll before we open up for more questions.
Thank you so much, Jessie. That was a lot of wonderful information. I'm going to launch a poll. If you would like a follow-up about consulting services to set up integrations with Bloomerang, please let us know. But in the meantime, we have more questions.
Yeah.
Can we set up a trigger for first transaction to a specific campaign?
Yeah, so that's kind of a custom use case, but it is something that we've done for a few organizations. So it typically requires some type of a holding queue or a pending queue or a custom call to the Bloomerang API to determine when the first transaction occurs. But yes, it's a more advanced use case, but it can be designed. So yes, it's a great use case. It's one we actually have had a client exploring currently.
Awesome. And you mentioned earlier that since we're dealing with multiple step Zaps here, it would have to be at least the lowest paid version of Zapier. Would you know if these workflows would work with the free version of Mailchimp?
Oh, so the free version of Mailchimp. So any automation in Mailchimp, so the customer journey feature, to actually turn your automation on, Mailchimp requires, similar to Zapier, I believe the lowest paid plan. So you could design your automations and get everything set up, but to actually turn your customer journey on in Mailchimp, I believe you would need, I think it's their Essentials plan is their lowest paid plan.
Thanks. And we talked about Mailchimp today, but could you do something similar if you were using Constant Contact or another email platform?
Yes, you could. There are some limitations with the Constant Contact Zapier app. If memory serves me right, any custom fields you set up in Constant Contact aren't necessarily available in Zapier to map to, but there may be potential with a custom call to the Constant Contact API. That's a more advanced use case there, but there are similar things you potentially could do with Constant Contact, but it would require kind of exploring what functionality is there. I will say, in terms of email marketing automation, Mailchimp is kind of one of the best in the space right now. Constant Contact hasn't provided like the customer journey functionality that Mailchimp has. Hasn't provided as much flexibility with what can trigger an automation or an email, and the Zapier app is more limited. But if your organization is using Constant Contact and you'd like to discuss what your use case is, please do not hesitate to reach out, and we can talk through what options are available to you.
Lovely. Earlier, we showed a sample where you made sure to show us that we're using currency.
Mm-hmm.
Could you do that if you have multiple currencies, if you have US and Canadian organizations or donors?
Yeah, so if you have multiple currencies, again, an advanced use case, but something that can be solved for. I'm probably starting to sound a little bit like a broken record, but with integrations, most things truly can be solved for. So it likely would be having separate Zaps set up for United States versus Canadian constituents that are syncing and creating custom events in Mailchimp, and just having separate rules for how those amounts are formatted and how that occurs. But yes, there likely is a way to solve for the different currency piece could be accommodated.
Lovely. When you're creating Zaps in Zapier, can you use Zapier to integrate with 2 or 3 different apps? For example, if you're going through Bloomerang or PayPal and Mailchimp and something else in between.
Yes, absolutely. That is a great question. It's one of our favorite things at Sidekick. We love, and it rhymes a little bit, multi-app Zaps. So yes, in Zapier, you can link multiple actions from multiple different apps into a single workflow. So you could trigger on a new transaction in PayPal to create a donation in Bloomerang, and at the same time, also create a custom event or add or update a subscriber in Mailchimp. So you can link many apps together in a single workflow in Zapier. You are not limited to a one-to-one workflow. You can have as many apps in that workflow as you'd like.
Wonderful. Lori asks, can we do ifs? So if it's a donor who used to donate, stopped and restarted, or gave one-time gifts and is now setting up recurring, can we send them a different series? So can we determine if this is we know you already versus you're new to us series?
Yeah, so there are different ways that the use case we walked through today for the recurring donation schedule can be designed. So if you wanted to see if it was, you'll only potentially sync constituents if it was their first ever recurring donation schedule, there's ways that we can do custom calls to the Bloomerang API or design custom calls to the Bloomerang API to capture different types of criteria that don't come through the new transaction trigger. So if you wanted to see, again, if it's someone's first recurring donation ever, or maybe they haven't given to the organization in 2 years and now they are a recurring donor, there are ways that we could solve for that so that only constituents that meet that additional criteria get filtered into that automation in Mailchimp.
Awesome. And the last question that we have is, if they're using, the example here is Fundraise up and send acknowledgements from there, could something like this replace their acknowledgement process in another system?
Yeah, so it really depends on the other system. So if the other system has acknowledgements inherent in it and you aren't able to turn that feature off, then any acknowledgement out of Mailchimp would be a duplicate. which depending on your use case, potentially you'd want, potentially you wouldn't want. But what you could do is, exclude out new transactions that are coming from your other platform like Fundraise Up, so that those don't trigger a duplicate acknowledgement in Mailchimp. Really comes down to your organization's preference. But yes, you could use a single source system like Mailchimp to send out email acknowledgements if you were able to turn them off in your other platforms that you're currently sending acknowledgements out of.
Awesome. Thank you, Jessie. And thank you everyone for all of your wonderful questions. I know Jessie said she doesn't want to sound like a broken record to say that's a more advanced use case, but I hope that's showing everyone that really there's so much you can do with this integration, and pretty much whatever you can dream up, there's probably going to be a solution for it. We just have to figure out what those steps are to get that to you. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you, Jessie, for all this great information. Definitely, we at Bloomerang are very excited for the extended capabilities through Zapier. We're very excited to see where you all will take it. And with over 3,000 now different apps that Zapier connects with, we've only just scratched the surface of what you can do with Bloomerang and Zapier. So we hope that you can find a way to automate your processes and work better with Bloomerang and Zapier. Thank you again, and have a great rest of your day. Bye.